my switch to full manual controls exactly 1 year ago, and it led to what is easily the most profound change in how I got to enjoy this game. If you're looking at this and wondering why the ball in my game seems to follow a more realistic trajectory than most PES footage out there, I'll let you know right now it's not because of any gameplay PC mods, which I never use by the way. It really is all about the use of full manual controls, and the realistically unlimited possibilities of goal scoring opportunities that it offers. There's also a certain satisfaction in releasing your players with a manual pass into space, which is something you can only do with manual controls, especially if you follow it with some of the new finesse dribbling or PES's subtle skills as you try to get past the excellent keepers in the game. Being able to manually pass anywhere into spaces behind defenders and getting your manual shot blocked without shooting assistance contributes to a form of natural organic chaos, where you see your players react to a manual pass that can land anywhere before ending up somewhere you weren't even planning. And the way these manual crosses can now land anywhere around the player, who's able to target anywhere in the goal, brings out these beautiful animations you rarely see with assisted controls. And the same improvement in animations is seen with passing, where the engine will have to dig out rarely used animations to release the ball anytime, even during a body feint, at any power and into any direction. This is something even console gamers can experience on the vanilla game by just turning off pass and shooting assists, and persisting through the learning curve. And there is a learning curve, no doubt. This is how I used to shoot when I first tried manual controls. Just give it time, and before long, you'll be able to pick out your players with manual passes to their feet, or into a space they're running into. That said, yes, it's been 9 months since PES 2021 came out, and aside from how comfortable I've become playing with full manual controls, a big reason why this year's game has been easily my most played PES yet is the insane level of maturity the PC mods have reached on Fox Engine. And the modded game looks so good that there is a possibility that next-gen PES won't look as good as a fully modded PES 2021 on PC. I mean, just look at it. To get a better idea of how wildly upgraded the game looks with PC mods, this here is how the game looks by default. The lighting is horrible, the grass looks yellow for some reason, and the broadcast cameras are uneditable. While on PC, I'm playing in the Santiago Bernabeu, one of over 600 modded stadiums from EVO-WEB's forums that were added to the game, and I'm using Jeremiah's incredible turf mod, which he made from scratch this time, to match every individual real-life stadium's pattern and color on TV, with custom-made nighttime lighting for each stadium, as well as proper sunlight where you can actively see the dynamic exposure increase as you move from the sunlit into the shaded parts of the pitch, or the other way around when you move from the shade into a bright part of the pitch. And you can see shadows realistically become darker as you move away from them. These mods come with small touches like the correct scoreboards and TV logos, as well as big universal changes like Jeremiah's foggy weather mod, which I love because it not only looks more realistic, but also even the slightest bit of fog smoothens any graphical imperfections the way anti-aliasing would. Now I understand why Konami couldn't add more stadiums, because those need licenses, which they don't own, but there really is no excuse for the developers screwing up unlicensed things like grass, lighting, cameras, and the weather. I already spoke about all these beautiful PC mods in another video, which I'll link in the description. But even while I've been making this video, Jeremiah's been able to mod the default clothes that crowds put on, which used to be previously uneditable, replacing the default inappropriately colorful Hawaiian attire during winter games in England with the dark jackets most people wear in real life that time of the year. But enough about the graphics. I mean, nobody plays PES because of its graphics, no matter how good they are with mods. And I will be incredibly disappointed if the PES developing team has spent the last 3 years of next-gen PES development only trying to make the game photorealistic, which in the age of AI and machine learning neural networks can be achieved with a push of a button. I mean, check out this AI neural network which can replace all the textures and models, even the flat ones in any video game, with photorealistic real-life textures and 3D models with a single command. And it actually works in real time, available today for GTA 5 with no extra rendering time required. What PES developers should have been doing these past 3 years is work on what they have been doing best this past decade, which is gameplay. Make no mistake, we are all playing PES and not FIFA because of the vastly superior gameplay, which mimics a sport nicknamed by Pelé as the beautiful game, compared to whatever EA's football-themed cards game has to offer, which is a far cry from the realistic organic gameplay experience PES has been offering for decades now. Now at its core, the on-pitch experience of any football title is about offense and defense, and the way you're able to switch between the two, which relies heavily on realistic off-ball tactical player movement, which might actually be the biggest differentiator in PES compared to FIFA's lifeless players. And then of course there's your player's movement on the ball, otherwise known as dribbling, and I'll include the role of skills with that category. Then there's the all too important manual passing of the ball around, which is how you should be realistically building up play in a decent football game to get the ball moving from one end to the other. As they say, the ball moves faster than the player, and this is the mechanic you'll be using to create all those shooting opportunities. And of course, I'll be talking about the very tricky but super rewarding manual shooting mechanics, as well as the role ball physics play in them. While defense will be about the way goalkeepers in the game react to attempts on target, as well as player awareness or lack thereof to where the ball is, and the location of other players on your team. But mainly, we'll be talking about the way defenders move off and on the ball, which most times is up there among the weakest points of the game. And it's the reason why most online formations look like this, so long balls can exploit this weakness in defender awareness. And this weakness is the reason I'm able, even with the challenge of full manual controls, to score a goal like that, which by the way is the fastest goal I've ever scored in a PES game. Speaking of online, I'll talk about what this horrible thing is, and what Konami can do to stop it from killing its online experience. And of course there's the referee and the horrible collisions, which are in dire need for a brand new engine, which is coincidentally what we're getting next year. So I have my fingers crossed for that long awaited fix. And we'll end the review with free kicks, which are beautiful with plenty of room for improvement. I'll leave timestamps in the description so we can jump to a certain tip or segment after you're done watching, because this will be a long video. And it's actually sponsored by the OneFootball App, which is easily the best way to get on top of the new season's transfers, and it actually makes a huge difference when all the football news I get are from the teams I'm most interested in, and it's the kind of small news that you'd have to dig for in other outlets that aren't specifically created for you. You can use the link in the description to get the free app. Let's kick off this review with manual passing and shooting. Full manual controls, or FUMA, means that you, the player, get to choose the exact direction and power of every action you perform in the game. Not only was I surprised by how quickly I got over the steep learning curve, but I immediately realized how I was now able to pass into empty spaces and have my players move to the ball. And you're no longer restricted by the direction of the receiver's run. You just pass into a space and your player will turn to move towards the ball. But it's more than just passing into spaces. When you start getting good at it, you'll be able to put just enough distance and weight into your manual pass so it reaches your player's feet in stride without slowing him down, making it easier to burst past the defender without having to deal directly with him. The play variety and possibilities introduced by full manual controls made it possible to build play using real-life tactics, where you actually pass into spaces through gaps in defense to find the goal. You see, on full manual, the game's engine won't help you avoid defenders blocking your pass. So as in real life, I found myself aiming through these gaps to send my players on efficient runs, beating several defenders en route to goal. And I'm talking about runs that can only be exploited using a manually placed and powered pass behind defense, in situations where an assisted pass would easily get intercepted early on in the play. There really was no turning back from manual passing, seeing how much more efficient passing into space was compared to assisted passing. This also made me more patient with my build-up, as I tried to find a gap through defense, then try to find another gap on target before shooting. And the better I got with my aim, the tighter the gaps I manually exploited got, leading to more goal-scoring opportunities. And while it's always better to manually pass through a gap into the direction of the player's run for a smoother build-up, passing into gaps is actually helped by the fact that your receiving players will move towards the space you push the ball into, compared to how your assisted passes relied on where they were already moving. And the applications can be as subtle as this example. Kai is moving inwards towards the center, but my manual pass pushes him to the side where he has a better chance of penetrating the defense on his dominant foot. And Isco here is moving to the center, but the pass trajectory is blocked by these players. So I just manually pass it into the space behind them, and he moves to collect it. Then he spots a space on the radar on the other end and moves the ball there. Speaking of the radar, it is absolutely essential in order to find your players running behind defense. So yes, with manual passing you get to indirectly move your players by passing into spaces without being restricted by the direction of player runs, and when you cut inside, you can pass into the space behind defenders and hope one of your players moves to the ball to finish it off. I'm also always asked if there was a difference between using the through pass and normal pass button with manual controls, and my answer used to be that there was none, but in one of Ricky's videos on the True Brits channel, he kept saying how using the through pass button produces a smoother pass that glides a lot better on the pitch, compared to the more bumpy and turbulent normal pass. And having paid more attention to the bumpiness of normal passing, I very much agree with what he said. I mean, it still no longer matters what setting you use for through passes, whether it's basic or advanced, when you've turned off passing assists, but I definitely noticed a smoother trajectory for my manual crosses when using the through pass button. I mean, look at how much air gets under this low cross using the standard pass button, and compare it to this much smoother pass using the through button instead. I mean, when I use the pass button, it's almost as high as an actual lofted cross, but the ball stays on the ground when I'm using the through button instead. But regardless which button you use, I've noticed that players with good ball control will move towards your manual pass the second you start putting in the command. Let's rewind again, and I want you to notice how quickly Isco backtracks to get to the ball earlier. This ability to pull in a player with a short manual pass comes in handy in the final third. In this example, Vinicius Jr. is bombing down the right side and is pointing where he wants the ball. The defender also seems to be running in that direction to block his attempt. But watch how I make a short manual pass towards the center, which yanks Vinicius off his predetermined path as he wrong-foots his mark and finishes it off. The same thing happens here, but with a long manual pass into space, which allows Robertson to build up momentum into his run, which he uses to push past Kenny. And it's those kind of physics that I really love about PES compared to FIFA. Players all have weight and carry momentum into their runs, which you can use to your advantage. Like watch how João Moutinho is running towards Robbo to block the left flank he usually runs into, but because my manual pass landed at Robbo's feet instead of in front of him, I'm able to make him move inwards into the pitch and move past João Moutinho, whose momentum in the opposite direction slows down his recovery, and from there I pull in Mane with a short manual pass to the center where he has room to finish it off. Let me actually rewind this for a quick detour. Did anyone notice Diogo's run that pulls in a defender to open up space for Mane? You simply do not see these kinds of realistic runs in FIFA. On the other hand, this defender inexplicably leaves Mane, and I'll talk about that later in this review. Now back to moving players with manual passing. Trent only starts to move when I pass into the space ahead of him. Then he pulls Firmino closer with another pass, who pulls Mane out with another manual pass. Now we might think that Mane's shot never had a chance, but that's only true with assisted shooting, because with manual shooting, there's always hope that you'll get the aim right and score from a difficult angle. And ever since I came to this realization, I started taking shots from angles I never would have dared attempt before switching to manual controls, like this header from an impossible angle. And that was particularly true when aiming towards the near post, which used to always be a guaranteed way to get a corner on assisted shooting, unlike of course with manual controls, where there was always hope you can score from anywhere. So yeah, these tight near-post angle goals were extremely rare on assisted shooting, but the beauty in PES is that when it feels like the right time to take a shot, it usually is. For instance here, my run is slowed down by a defender, so the ball rolls a little further away from me, making it perfectly primed for a shot. And if there's one reason why I would never go back to assisted shooting, it's definitely the ability to score long-range screamers with full manual controls. In all my years of playing with assists, I wouldn't even waste time trying to score from a straight shot from that far out, because with manual controls, there's always hope that you'd get the angle and power just right to get into that top bin, especially if you're already dribbling with the ball, which creates a better frame of reference to get your aim right, and I'll talk about that later. Another incredibly realistic thing about long-range manual shooting in PES, which I'll dive deeper into when I talk about keepers, has to do with the fact they have a real line of sight, which influences their ability to respond to a shot. Without shooting assists, the game will allow you to shoot into any direction, even if there are players blocking the keeper's ability to see the shot being taken. Like the way the keeper doesn't have time to properly react to this manual rocket Kai unleashed through the defender's legs straight down the middle. And because you'll start taking more long rangers with manual shooting, oftentimes there will be enough time for these blocking players to get out of the way, leaving the keeper facing a shot he didn't have time to prepare for, leading to some realistically awkward outcomes. Now of course player stats play a huge role in manual controls. For instance, long-range shooting and rising shot traits will keep the ball level provided that you make the precisely correct power and aim selections. And players with a dipping trait will take the manual shot in a manner that brings its trajectory down into the net. But again, that lovely dipping trait won't mean anything if your manual aim is off. And it's the same thing with manual passing. I mean yes, you're still the one required to have an eye out for your player runs, and to properly place your manual pass on the correct side towards your player's dominant foot. And yes, you're the one who still needs to choose the proper timing of releasing the manual pass to make more room for the receiver on the other end. For instance, Abraham could have laid it off immediately, but he instead turns and makes the better pass into space behind the defender for Ziyech to run into. And because of how much control I had over the weight and direction of my passes, I started thinking several steps ahead. Like here, I could have passed the ball earlier, but I hold off till both my winger and my striker are in position to pull this off. And yes, you're also the one responsible for aiming your manual pass, whether it's into a space ahead of your player or precisely through defense to his feet, so he'd use his momentum to burst past the defender en route to goal. And you also need to know how far you want to push the ball to give a faster player enough room to get ahead of his mark. Like over here, Salah needs a manual pass that just gives him enough room to beat Thiago Silva before touching the ball. I mean, imagine how much more rewarding these goals feel when you get it all right. And finally, your body position in relation to the ball is another variable you need to control, especially when attempting a long manual drive. In this example, I want to deliver the ball all the way to James there, but the ball is too close to Marcos Alonso, so even though I've selected maximum power for the pass, he doesn't have enough room to adjust and deliver it using his stronger left foot, and he doesn't have enough room to run into the pass, so he ends up just poking it with his foot. On the other hand, for this play, I held the sprint button, so the ball rolls further ahead as he turns, giving him room for a brief run into a long drive with a stronger foot. And that's another thing to take into consideration. Marcus might have the long-range drive and the long ball expert traits, but he doesn't have good weaker foot usage, so when his body position forces him into a weaker foot long manual drive, he won't be able to correct the direction of your pass with an inside-out swerve towards his target, and the ball will instead always drift away to the inside. He'll still be able to pull off many beautiful switches of play with his weaker foot, but they just won't curl to the outside, which he doesn't need in this instance. Now compare that to a long drive by a stronger left foot, as he pulls off this beautiful inside-out spin that he adds to my manual input into this pass. Trent, on the other hand, has better weaker foot usage, and also has the outside curler trait, which enables him to add the appropriate spin even on his weaker foot with long manual drives forward. This brings me to the common misconception out there. Player traits and attributes actually do make a huge difference in the outcome of your manual passes. For instance, Thiago has 92 low passing, 89 curl, and therefore has a through passing trait and an outside curler trait, and is a long ball expert. And because of that, he inspires players around him to run into spaces and expect passes into their runs. So look how these traits come together when he adds this perfect outside curler correction into this manual through pass to Diogo behind United's defense. Now compare that to Dele Alli, who doesn't have any of these traits, so his manual through pass doesn't receive any special swerving correction and gets intercepted. And I love this one. Hakim Ziyech has 90 lofted passing, 85 curl, as well as through passing, weighted pass, pinpoint crossing, and outside curler traits. In this example, I kind of overpower my long pass into space ahead of Hudson-Odoi, but look at how Hakim corrects it by channeling this extra power into more height, while adding a backspin to keep the ball in play so it actually slows down when it lands. And as in real life, thanks to the inspire trait that I'll explore more when talking about off-ball movement and runs, other players are inspired to make far runs into space when a good passer with the inspire trait takes control of the ball. In this example, Timo is just casually jogging around, but once the cursor moves to Ziyech, who inspires these kinds of runs in other players, you clearly see Timo's run suddenly pick up pace as he makes a run up the pitch. And even though I slightly overpowered my long manual pass, Ziyech adds a backspin so it lands in a way that allows Timo to chest it down in stride and have an open path to goal. Now compare that to Zuma's switch of play without having any of these traits. Instead of applying an outside-in spin to correct the direction of the long ball, it just swerves away, making Chilwell backtrack to receive it. And you're not just limited by traits, you're also realistically limited by the amount of power each player is able to put into a long drive. For instance, Thiago Silva has a kicking power of only 76, so even with a full power bar, his long ball barely makes it past the center circle. And there are no corrections for a manual pass that you didn't put enough power into. And that's the beauty of manual controls. It's rewarding because regardless of the player you control, it's still you who has to find your players and make the proper direction and power choices, including how to receive the ball and disperse of it. For instance, Hazard here applies just the right amount of spin to your manual pass to reach Benzema behind the defense. But Salah's curler gets blocked because I simply didn't aim it well enough. Same for Genie's curler manual pass, I just didn't push it forward enough. This outside curling pass only happens with players who have the proper traits, and only when it needs to correct the trajectory of the manual pass you made. Like here with Hazard, I make all the right choices in terms of power and direction of my manual pass, and there's no defender blocking the trajectory, so it doesn't get triggered in this particular situation. But it's not as reliable a mechanic as I'd love it to be. For instance here, Modric pulls off an outsider curler pass, but Asensio, who also has the trait, doesn't do it when I really needed them to. So 100% yes, even with full manual controls, having better players on your teams will lead to all the subtle real-life advantages of having these players with pretty much any play, provided you make the right power and aim selections. The same influence of player attributes comes into play for one of the most challenging manual plays ever, crossing into the box. With manual controls, you can actually cross from anywhere on the pitch, no matter how deep into the pitch you are. Player traits make a massive difference when it comes to manual crossing. The pinpoint crossing trait makes it swerve in a way that maximizes the chance of finding one of your players behind the defender. This curl in the ball's trajectory is usually what keeps it from reaching the defender first. Like this is what a straight cross would look like without the pinpoint crossing trait. But even with this trait, it's still up to you to apply the correct power and aim with full manual controls. And you still need to aim the cross according to your player's curl stats. For instance, with only a curl ability of 70, even with a pinpoint crossing trait, Mendy's cross won't magically swerve back into the path of your strikers. Lucas Vazquez, for example, doesn't have the pinpoint trait, or enough curl to make him a good attacking fullback in the game. And if you apply too much power when manually crossing with a pinpoint crosser, I found that he'll translate this extra power into giving the cross more height so that it still lands around your target in the box. I also definitely recommend almost always holding L1 when crossing to pull off a lofted cross when your player has the Pinpoint Crossing trait. It keeps the ball pleasantly level for your striker to find it mid-air. Although with good technique, I was able to find Mane here with just a normal cross without any special crossing traits. The difference is, you still need the Pinpoint Crossing trait to whip it in with this massive swerve. And similar to shooting, it's always better from a physics standpoint to cross a ball that was moving back towards the crosser. So yes, player stats and traits have many subtle effects on the outcome of your manual plays, unlike what I thought for all those last years playing with assists. But they're just as subtle as they need to be, and it's ultimately up to you whether you end up hitting the target even when shooting with a player like Modric. And after you've done the correct choices when passing the ball around, when you do score, it's mostly because it was you who estimated the correct degree of analog stick tilt needed for a shot. And when you miss, it was mostly because you were either too subtle with your aim or a little too generous with the analog stick. But the keyword here is you. You, and not the game's assistants, are the one whose skill will determine a big part of the outcome of your play. And I'll tell you now, it is way less frustrating when you pull off many beautiful manual passes during build-up only for you and not the game engine to screw up when you take your shot. Sure, the attributes of the players you control will also play a significant role in determining the outcome of each play, but having that much control over every single move you pull off using full manual controls leads to not only the most realistic looking gameplay I've ever enjoyed, but the most rewarding feeling after every goal I've manually guided into the net. I mean, the reason free kicks are so satisfying to score is mainly because of how much control you're given over the exact aim and power of your shot. I'll talk about free kicks at the end of this review, but they're an excellent example of a full manual shot that even assisted players have been taking for years. It's just an easier version of manual shooting because the ball isn't moving and you have a ton of time to figure out your aim, power, and curl before taking the shot. But when you score a free kick, you still know that it was all about your exact input without any assists from the engine. But what makes open play manual shooting even better is the accurate realistic physics variables that govern the moving ball's behavior. Like when your player runs, he's actually building up momentum that contributes to the power of your shot. In this example, Kroos fills the power bar even more than Modric, but he's shooting from a standing position with no momentum built up, resulting in a weaker shot. Now, if you fill up the power bar too much, especially when adding in a running momentum, your ball will skid over the bar. It's best to think of the power bar as a height bar. The less you fill it up, the lower your aim. Using Giroud's weaker foot produces a similar effect with a slightly full power bar, and the more you fill it up, the higher your shot, especially on your stronger foot. Now add a running momentum behind a weaker foot shot with 80% power and you'll struggle to hit the target. Now of course a player like Messi will be able to keep it level with a running momentum on a stronger foot, even if you generously fill up the power bar. The accurate ball physics come into play when you're shooting into the opposite direction of the ball's movement. The combined forces of the ball rebounding in addition to the force of the shot itself results in a much more powerful shot without even having to fill the power bar. It's actually the best way to take a shot with players who don't have particularly good shooting stats, as they won't need to generate the full force of the shot on their own. It also results in a smoother, more level shot on target. But when hitting a ball rolling back to you, it's important to choose the proper phase in its bounce to hit it. So these are the phases of a dropping ball when you should try to take your shot in order to get a proper dip, with a tight half volley being the most difficult but most rewarding. Generally speaking, the best phase to hit the ball is when it's dropping into its next bounce. For instance, even though Henderson is a long ranger with the rising shot trait that keeps his shot level, he takes the shot way too late after it rises from its bounce, so it flies into the stands. As a rule, if you see the bounce had just happened, it's usually too late, because it means you're taking the ball while it's rising from the bounce. The closer you hit it after the bounce, the lower its trajectory. So you actually want to hit the ball right as it touches the ground. Now the next two half volleys are hit at the same phase of the bounce, but the big difference between both is the direction the cross was coming from. In the first example, Asensio receives a ball coming from the side. It makes a very brief bounce and flies over the crossbar. On the other hand, Firmino hits this half volley with the exact same brief bounce, but the cross he receives was moving back away from the goal. And what a difference that makes in keeping it level. Now if you miss that moment as it touches the ground, you want to wait till the ball starts dropping into the next bounce to get it to dip. Players with better shooting stats will still be able to get over a high ball rising from its bounce, but hitting a dropping ball remains to be the best way to get a dip on your shot. The flatter the drop, the less dip you get. And the ball physics are so realistic that you get maximum dip if you hit the ball at the lowest point of a steep drop. And the higher the drop, the better the dip. It's not surprising given how much better the ball physics have always been in PES compared to FIFA. You can see the way the ball acquires a new spin when colliding with any object like a post. That spin will realistically influence its trajectory, and the amount of spin the ball acquires depends on the angle it meets said object. I can make a whole video about the way the ball swerves off the post in PES. Even the pole holding the net in place has accurate physics in PES. And look at how this collision spins the ball and pushes it back to Robertson when it lands. Or how this powerful shot slides off Courtois' gloves and the new spin makes it skid forward when it bounces. Now if you're wondering how I'm scoring all these full manual goals while shifting between many different broadcast cameras that are quite challenging to play with, well, I'm about to dish out all my tips and secrets, as this might be my last video for quite some time. First of all, it doesn't really matter which broadcast camera I'm using, because manual shooting is all about creating a frame of reference before taking your aim on target. For instance, if I'm moving my player in X angle using my current analog stick position, then I can estimate roughly how much I need to move the stick to produce a shot through Y angle. The longer you spend moving in a certain direction, the easier it is to calculate the change you need when aiming your shot. It's a lot harder to produce a small subtle change in the direction you're pointing the analog stick at, which is what happens when you approach the goal from the dead center. And this is why long-range shots are a lot harder to score than close-range shots, which is quite realistic. You see, from long range, making a small change from your dribble direction to your aim direction produces a big change the more the distance the ball needs to travel en route to goal. And subtle changes in direction are a lot harder to pull off with the analog stick than the big changes in direction required the closer you get to the goal. In this example, I know the direction I'm dribbling into. Using this as the frame of reference, I can estimate how much I need to change it in order to aim to the far post, which is a bigger and therefore easier change because I kept moving away towards the near post. This is why I'll also do my best to try to avoid hitting the ball from the dead center, because from there you need a very subtle change in your aim to hit the sides of the goal. Because again, the more subtle the change, the more difficult it is to pull off, especially if the player shooting doesn't get enough time on the ball to create a frame of reference for the required change in direction. And that's true even if you're moving in the opposite direction of your shot. Shooting from the center still requires a more subtle and therefore more difficult change in your aim compared to the bigger, easier change you need when shooting from the side. And that's exactly what happens in this play. Firmino pushes the ball even further to the side, creating a wider angle of change when he shoots into the opposite direction of his run. And I will always go for the shot that needs a bigger change in direction when aiming. Like here, Marcus is moving towards the far post. To aim there, I need a smaller change in direction compared to the bigger and easier change in direction to the near post, which is what I go for. Keep in mind, this isn't a recipe for guaranteed success. Like, you still have to deal with the excellent keepers in the game, even if you get your aim right. And it's not always the right thing to do. Like here, I should have at least tried to go for the harder shot towards the near post that required a subtle change in direction, since the easier far angle was blocked by the defender. Another thing I'll do when I find myself dribbling straight down the middle, which is the easiest direction to point at from any camera, is push the ball one step to the side, then shoot straight ahead into the same direction of my first dribble, which is straight ahead. Only now my player is aiming to the sides of the goal, and not the center. This is a good way of creating a gap in defense to get your shot through, since the defenders won't react fast enough to your last second change in direction while you're charging at them. And creating a gap and just manually blasting through it on target is an extremely realistic way of shooting in PES. You can usually judge where the goal is by projecting it onto the middle 2 quarters of the penalty arc. If your player is at the periphery of this area, you're good just to aim straight ahead. These methods work regardless of how low or difficult the stadium's broadcast camera is. You simply modify the direction of your dribble in relation to the penalty arc, then take your shot. So now I'm in the center and I'm pointing straight ahead. And you can see from the projection of the goal, it is useless to shoot in that direction. So I make one push to the side, then go back to aiming straight ahead. In this play, I burst into space diagonally while planning to release my shot with an aim straight ahead once I get into one of those 2 lanes. Now of course, it's a lot easier if you feel you don't have to change your aim and can just shoot into the direction of your run. It's easier because you already see the direction you're dribbling into and can eyeball a straight path that continues to the corner of the goal that you're targeting. And that's true even if you only had a few steps into that direction before shooting. You actually only need a few steps to know you're facing the side of the goal and not its center. And I had gotten so good at it that I don't even need to see the goal to figure out that I don't need to change my aim to score. Oftentimes, if I don't have enough room, I'll turn my player's dribble into the direction I want to shoot into for a step or 2 to make sure I got it right before releasing my shot. I'll talk about finesse shots later in this review. But if you can't turn to face the far post, no matter how widely you manually aim, the player won't produce this aim if he can't turn his body well enough before taking the shot. And here's why manual passing works great with manual shooting. An assisted through pass would have been placed to the left of the defender, sending Timo Werner down the center for a difficult FUMA finish. But by manually placing the pass to the defender's right, Timo approaches the goal at a wider angle, making it easier to go for the far post. Finally, you need to do your best to shoot using your player's stronger foot. Asensio is left-footed. Approaching the goal from the right side, a shot to the far post can only be done with his weaker right foot. And the defender is actually doing a good job blocking the easier near post shot that I can pull off with the stronger left foot. So I push the ball to the center to open up a gap, while also creating a bigger angle between the direction of my dribble and direction of my aim, which makes the change in direction easier to pull off. This is why I have a lot of respect for difficult FUMA goals, like the ones shot from the dead center to the sides, as well as goals that required a subtle change in the direction of the aim compared to the direction of dribble. And let's not forget that while long ranges are more feasible with full manual controls, they still require a very subtle and quite difficult change in your aim to get into that tight spot. Now this whole time I've been talking about the importance of using this direction of dribble as a frame of reference to guide your aim when taking a shot. But what about shots that don't even have a dribbling frame of reference? Like any first time shot on target, including all the volleys and headers on full manual. Without this dribbling frame of reference, these shots are realistically the most difficult to aim with manual controls, especially with an extra challenge thrown in, like having to shoot from the center, or having a very tight angle you need to aim at without having the dribbling frame of reference. There's also the issue of adjusting the power of your manual shot when dealing with a volley. I mean, look at the difference in the outcome here with Asensio when you go for a little less power on that volley compared to Mane's shot. But these shots are also the most difficult to pull off in real life. And that's another reason why playing on full manual is the most realistic, most rewarding, and therefore most enjoyable way of playing a football game. Because the joy you get as a FUMA player when scoring these challenging first-timers without the dribbling frame of reference is very similar to the joy players experience in real life when they score these goals. And this joy is more pronounced when the goal scorer happens to have an acrobatic finish trait among his attributes. And to be honest, for these FUMA first-timers, what you want to do is exactly what the top professionals do in real life. You try to aim on target and just hope for the best. If you don't believe me, here is this season's EPL Golden Boot winner Harry Kane. When he's taking this first-time volley, he is not deliberately leaving the entire space around the keeper and aiming between Kasper Schmeichel's legs. He's just getting it on target. And the goals I score when I'm just blasting it on target actually do have a more realistic trajectory to them. Trying to just get your first timers on target applies to your headers as well. Even world-class strikers in real life will deal with most headers the same way. The transferred power from the cross, combined with the proximity of most headers to goal, means that realistically, all you need to do is get them on target, and the keeper is not likely to have enough time to properly block it, especially when it hits the ground first. And even with an AI defender guarding the near post, who aren't entirely useless to be honest, but it's true especially if the ball's too high to reach, where even Neuer's Superman jump won't make it in time. But I'd be lying if I said I was intentionally aiming them high. I mean, you can always try to direct any manual header using your FUMA experience, with maximum reward if you get it right. But just getting the header on target is usually all you have time to do when dealing with a corner, especially when you're moving your player to break away from defense. And that's the way I prefer, so I'd get a clean header. By hitting L2, then moving the analog stick, you can take control of your striker, making it easier to move him into the danger zone. Or you can bring him ahead of other defenders. And while it becomes harder to aim while I'm moving the player, his proximity will compensate for your lack of aim, even when the cursor auto switches to a better positioned player, although I'm still able to aim it when that happens, even if I had to switch the cursor back to my first choice. Also, moving the player can provide a frame of reference to help with your aim, and my most beautiful headers off of corners came when I was able to direct the header to the far side opposite to my player's run. The physics of the ball skidding off the player's head and bouncing into that far corner of the goal are just extremely appealing to watch, especially on replays. It's actually easier to manually aim at the reverse side with low corners. Now, my method of taking corner kicks, which I've already described in a separate video, involves filling up the power bar all the way so that when it lands on your player's head, it bounces off of it with such unstoppable power that all you need to do is meet the ball, whether you do that with your head or with your player's extended foot, as in this spectacular flying karate kick. Now, I know I'm showing many corner goals here, but this method is actually trickier than it looks, and if you don't do it right, you run the risk of overshooting the whole penalty box, and every now and then, the ball won't be high enough for a header. But my method is the most effective at preventing this from happening. Also, unless the ball's too high to reach, the keeper might be able to react to a powerful header hit right at him, or even react to the cross itself, throwing off your striker with a faint touch that alters its trajectory. Fortunately, keepers are realistically more forgiving when you're hitting a first-timer from such close proximity, sometimes too forgiving on rare occasions. It's not exactly a problem with FUMA, since they do pull off some incredibly impressive saves the vast majority of the time. I almost don't have any issues with keepers, but I'll talk about them in detail when I talk about defense in this review. And while keepers aren't a problem with FUMA, there are some very annoying issues with the mechanics of full manual controls that definitely need to be ironed out. For instance, one of the advantages of full manual controls is being able to manually pass the ball anywhere around the player, including passing behind the player. Now, the current engine does have some cool animations when receiving balls from the side, and if you have enough space and time, the engine will turn your player to face the proper direction when receiving a pass behind him, and that will lead to a much smoother dribble en route to goal. The problem is, the motion capture based engine doesn't seem to have enough animations to prepare any player to receive a ball that can suddenly show up behind him during any stage of his run. And this is a very annoying issue that frequently rears its ugly head with manual passing, specifically when the ball approaches the player from behind him. And it doesn't matter where your player is on the pitch. It could happen all the way in the back with nobody applying pressure on your player. It could happen all the way up front and even lead to a goal. Your player stats don't matter, and it doesn't matter if they're looking at you and the ball as it approaches. Neither does it matter how much time they had to get ready to receive the pass. But sometimes it won't happen, even if the ball approaches from behind the player. I think if it's close enough to his body, the game engine will find a decent animation to receive the ball without this weird animation. It's still a shame because I love passing behind my player and having him turn to surprise the keeper with a shot. The thing is, this animation isn't even meant to show up when receiving a pass. It's actually made to intercept an opponent's pass happening behind one of your players. There just happens to be a missing line of code that allows this animation to happen when you're receiving a pass from your own player. It's not even considered a tackle because the broken referee won't give a foul if your player trips on it. I remember the first time I saw this animation a couple years ago when I used to play on assisted controls, and I was very impressed with it because of how rare it was. And because you couldn't pass behind a player with assisted controls, I never got to see it being incorrectly used by the game engine. But with manual passing and a ball that can be placed anywhere behind the player, it's happening all over the place. Like, I don't feel any frustration with the game when I miss a manual pass, because that's my fault. I mean, I feel disappointed in my choices when I'm on manual, but I no longer get annoyed or angry when I miss my target with FUMA, because I have full control over it. And when you get good at moving the ball around with full manual controls, you will generally only miss for all the right and realistic reasons, like not having time to adjust your aim to deal with a quick rebound from the keeper, or being sandwiched by defenders who won't give you time or space to adjust your aim. And this kind of realism and relative lack of frustration on FUMA makes this weird animation issue stick out like a thorn, ruining all those classy manual plays. The problem here is with the animation engine, and its inability to produce the correct animation to transition any player's running animation during all its stages into receiving a pass coming from behind him. And this problem is a great example of my main issue with motion captured animations, especially in the age of machine learning AI driven animations. Motion captured animations, no matter how many of them Konami keeps adding into the game's engine, will still be very limited in number compared to the actual scope of human body movements, especially in a sports game with rapid movements, and even more so with full manual controls where the ball can come from any direction and any height and demand the player receiving it to modify his current animation to receive it in an optimal fashion. Don't get me wrong, full manual controls are the best way to experience the maximum number of animations whose full spectrum in the game engine you wouldn't experience with assists. And that was what brought me to switch to FUMA a year ago. It's just that there aren't enough animations in Konami's engine to meet the demands and freedom of full manual controls. And using inverse kinematics is a very old solution game companies have been using for several years to slightly modify motion captured animations. And it improves things like foot planting and contact with the ball, but in this day and age, it just won't cut it anymore for football games. I mean, look how cheaply Varane's feet clips into the ball to adjust his position for the motion captured passing animation to play off. And out of all players, you can feel the inadequacy of motion capture the most for keepers who use all four limbs to interact with the ball. Like in this play here, the keeper rushes forward to block my shot, and most of the time, they actually do a great job spreading out. But in this particular play, the animation engine sends the keeper model a body spreading movement that isn't appropriate given the angle I'm approaching him. Like, why would he have both arms in front of him instead of having his right arm blocking the goal? We all complain about responsiveness, and that's another drawback of a motion capture based animation engine. They don't possess the ability to generate a realistic movement that conveys the action I'm trying to pull off in a timely fashion, often forcing the player to take an extra step between my command and the action I wanted to pull off. Like, look how sluggish motion captured animations make a sense you turn like a truck to face the ball. Same for Rodrigo, who sluggishly turns to face Benzema. The engine is just not responsive enough for the likes of Messi to shine. I mean, I can acknowledge how sometimes the lack of responsiveness is on me. Like over here, I'm the one who made the mistake by delaying my input till it was too late for my player to do a volley. That's fine, that's on me. But in this one, I released the shooting button at a moment where there isn't any motion captured header animation to fill in the gap, so Benzema just falls. And in this play, I already filled up the power bar well before Kai receives the ball, but even with that, the motion capture based engine forces him to receive the ball first instead of immediately going for a volley. And in this example, given the limited time I gave it when I filled up my power bar with the ball so close to Casemiro, the animation engine isn't smart enough to quickly modify Casemiro's run in a way that allows him to take the shot with his stronger right foot, and as a result, it lets the ball roll a little further for a weak foot shot instead. Now compare that to an AI machine learning based engine, where the engine already knows the full capabilities and limitations of the human body, as well as how to manage its center of gravity while performing various tasks. PES developers can sing all day about photorealism in next year's game, and I'm sure the game will look stunning in screenshot, but they need to start thinking about machine learning driven animations down the line so they don't find themselves left behind in the very near future. Another issue with manual controls that I won't spend too much time on relates to short passes being a little too overpowered. Even if I slightly tap pass, look how far and fast the ball shoots out of Kai's foot. But the issue with short passes circles back to how rigid motion captured animations are. Like over here, Messi seems to start a too aggressive run away from the goal at the moment the short pass is made behind him, but because it's a packaged motion captured animation, his left leg continues to move forward, then he suddenly jerks into the right direction a little too late. My last problem with passing has to do with player switching, and it happens with both assisted and manual controls, but a little more with manual passing because the game engine might not immediately know which player you actually want to pass to. It's not even strictly related to passing. Like even on loose balls, it might switch to the wrong player first. And over here, it doesn't even offer Vinicius as an option to switch to, restricting the switch to Modric and Valverde, while Vinicius continues to act completely oblivious to the ball. And again here when it doesn't switch the cursor to Casemiro. I'll talk about my issues with player awareness in the defensive part of this review. Weirdly enough, my main frustration with player switching isn't about the cursor going to the wrong player, even though that is part of the issue, nor is it with the delay in making the switch. Like here the cursor lingers with Casemiro too long, fails to switch back to him before moving to Cruz too late again. My main problem is with very brief interruption in auto player movement towards a manual pass. Now I already spoke about auto player movement and I love it 95% of the time because it allows me to move players around by passing into space. But that 5% of the time when it decides to interrupt his run for a millisecond is one of those engine frustrations that I have no control over, and they needlessly ruin many manual plays I worked hard to put together. And it's a real pain the way it ruins your feeling of being in full control on full manual. It can even ruin all those beautiful random moments in PES that you don't control, like how Henderson leaps to receive the ball but it majestically bounces off of him in the best way possible, only for the issue with player switching to rear its ugly head down the line and ruin the whole thing. And check this one out, Carvajal is actually ahead of his mark and is waving to Varane. He's not even offside. If I pass into that space, he's through to the goal. But boom, he gets sniped off by Konami's animation engine. And I do think it's a problem that can be traced back to the lack of flexibility of motion captured animations and their inability to smoothly transition into any direction the way machine learned animations can smoothly and cleverly pull off. But with the rigidness of motion captured animations, I need to hope that every pass I make doesn't send a command that disrupts the current running animation cycle of the player on the other end. And PES has this really neat feature where players are aware of the offside trap and will slow down to avoid it, and I really appreciate this feature in this game. And most of the time, they are ready to run once the pass is made, but sometimes there doesn't happen to be a motion captured transitioning animation to slow down their run during a particular frame in their running cycle, so they'll just come into a complete stop and lose their running momentum altogether. And sometimes it's just poorly programmed, like what offside trap is Asensio trying to avoid by stopping that early ahead of Barca's backline. On the other hand, switching to the wrong player seems to be purely down to bad programming, so it really is a blend of issues concerning both the rigid animation engine and poor programming that isn't smart enough to know which player the cursor should automatically switch to. And I can see what it's trying to achieve. Like over here, I power the pass so it goes to Marcelo, but I mess up my manual aim so the cursor switches to Hazard instead, which is great, but then it jumps to Marcelo even though the game engine should know he won't make it. I mean, why on earth would the game think I didn't want to pass to Isco, but instead goes for Benzema, who's not only much further away but also offside? And sometimes it's just bad programming where players don't realize they should continue running because I'm about to pass into a space in front of them. Like over here, right after I fill up the power bar, Giroud just stops and the ball goes to Timo, who's offside of course. This will be more relevant when I'm talking about defensive positioning, but there certainly is a tendency in PES for players to move into the position they are supposed to be in as opposed to the space they should run into. Like why would Modric stop running forward into space here? Moving on to my last issue with passing and shooting, and this is coming from someone who considers himself a good PES player, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how to reliably pull off a manual finesse shot. Remember what I said about how easier it was to manually shoot into the same direction of your run? Yeah, that rule doesn't apply to manual finesse shots. Without changing the direction of my dribble, holding down the finesse button will randomly not add a much needed spin to my manual shot. You can see it very clearly here. A finesse shot will sometimes just have no curl whatsoever. I feel that on manual, the finesse button becomes more like a dink button, where you get to float the ball in instead. As a matter of fact, after a whole year of playing with full manual controls, while actually scoring several finesse goals, a few with some beautiful curls applied to them, if you ask me what are the rules that govern finesse shots with FUMA, I'll tell you I simply don't know. Whipping it in first time won't add curl the way it worked with crossing, and if there are rules, then they're too random inconsistent to be reliable. Like sometimes the ball will swerve the way it should, and sometimes it won't swerve at all. Like I can see the ball spinning, but it doesn't lead to the curl I got with assisted controls. As a result of this inconsistency, I found myself going for traditional straight shots in situations where I needed to go for a finesse shot to curl it in around the keeper. I just found it to be more reliable to avoid the finesse button altogether and go for a powerful straight shot. I really miss my long-range finesse goals from my assisted shooting days, which yes, were way too easy to pull off, especially from long distances. Maybe part of it is psychological, like you think the ball will curl in, so you deliberately aim a little to the side. But this change in aim is rarely subtle enough with manual controls when it's done at a distance. And no matter how close I got, it just doesn't make sense to only score one long-range finesse after a whole year of playing in FUMA, and it didn't even spin on its way in. And when I found myself stringing together a nice manual play, I tried overcompensating by going to the middle so it won't go wide, but that didn't work either. And I really hope the developers do something about manual finesse shots, or release a tutorial to make them more accessible, because I remember how heavily I used to rely on them on assisted controls. I still would absolutely never go back to assisted controls after adjusting to manual shooting, but fixing manual finesse shots and bringing back the curl would go a long way towards making FUMA more accessible to the community. Now, despite the intricate physics that make manual passing of the ball around and shooting in PES a uniquely satisfying and rewarding experience, the crown jewel of Pro Evolution Soccer's gameplay, its biggest differentiator compared to FIFA, and the thing that makes all those passes and realistic build-up play work so well is the incredibly purposeful off-ball player movement in PES. Without realistic off-ball player movement in a football game, you don't get realistic passing options to pass to, and you end up like FIFA, just agile dribbling your way to the goal while pulling off as many circus skills as you can put together. Your team's shape and how it moves in defense before transitioning into attack are all a product of the beautiful off-ball player movement in PES, which is governed by your tactical choices. For instance, in defense, a frontline pressure style will have your strikers pressing the opposition backline harder, making it easier to exploit missed passes and punish them more decisively. For your offense, a counter-attacking style will have your players making forward runs the second you regain possession of the ball, allowing for a faster transition of play, while a possession style is slower paced and moves players in a manner that provides passing options not just forward but in any direction. The goal is to retain the ball as you work your way around defense, trying to find a gap to cross into or another gap to shoot through. You can combine those styles with build-up tactics like the short pass one, where you get to outpass the opposition all the way up the pitch as your players keep getting close-range passing options the further forward you progress. On manual passing, short passes are challenging to pull off, but are also devastating the better you get at them. On the other hand, the long pass build-up is almost begging you to transition to manual controls to maximize your use of space up front. In this type of build-up, your players will pull away from their marks towards the opposition goal, then burst into spaces in the final third. Then there are the advanced instructions, and those define individual player movement. I actually think those tactics make the biggest difference of everything I've mentioned so far. These are instructions that can provide you with attacking fullbacks bursting down both flanks to offer you passing options down the sides. A false number 9 will drop behind your strikers to provide essential link-up play between the lines. I've already covered many of those instructions in my 2 tactical realism videos aiming to replicate Zidane and Klopp's tactics, which I'll link in the description. I tried and failed to replicate Bielsa Ball, but that brought to my attention several shortcomings and meaningless restrictions with Konami's otherwise amazing tactics. First of all, you can only apply 2 advanced instructions per offense and defense for some reason, and you can only save 3 or 4 plans for the whole game. Secondly, many real-life tactics require having tailored individual player instructions, which we used to have in old-gen PES titles, where I can tell a player exactly which corridors they should attack with their runs. The closest thing to an individual instruction in the current system is the tight marking and counter-target instructions, where I tell a certain player to stay up front and not participate in any defensive efforts. Finally, this is expected, but you'll be disappointed to learn that despite this incredible selection of tactics included in the game, Konami's team was too small to properly assign the correct tactics that reflect every single team's real-life tactics. Most of the time, Konami will assign something like a deep defensive instruction to every team in the league, regardless of how offensive these teams play in real life. This is where third-party tactical mods come into play. Clashman is a well-known modder who's been providing this free service for several years now, but the biggest, most intricate and accurate work I've seen so far is Third Kidman's Big Brother Pass Maps mod. This is also a single modder who pretty much painstakingly recreated extremely detailed real-life tactics for over 450 teams in the game, including over 1,800 tactics since several teams have fluid formations. I'm not just talking about every single team in the major European leagues, he did it for the second division teams, as well as all teams in the Brazilian and Argentine Argentinian First Divisions, and went as far as doing it for the J-League and Chinese teams too. Best thing about it, you simply implement them by dropping your edit file into a program and pressing one button. This is 100% a must-have for any offline player. I consider this mod to do to gameplay what Jeremiah's Fog and Turf does to graphics. I've left a link to his incredible work in the description. This is a monumental effort, which massively affects how you get to enjoy this game offline. And I know offline isn't exactly a priority for PES, even though it should, but this isn't something one modder or even Konami should do. Instead, tactics are not licensed. So why can't Konami outsource the job and provide us with a way to painlessly share them throughout the community? This way, console gamers would also be able to enjoy these tactical mods, and not only PC gamers. Now, even with all these intricate tactics, there are simpler ways to get your players moving. I've already mentioned how you can pull in a player by manually passing into an empty space, but you can actually add an attacking role to a midfielder, so he'd move forward and join the attack. But some roles can't just be given. Players with good passing stats will usually have an Inspire trait. This trait inspires other players to run into spaces when these good passers are on the ball. It's very realistic and reminds me of something Mourinho told his players before facing United.
And every time Pogba has the ball, he will have the vision, he will have the quality of pass. So I can imagine Pogba from a position like that to get the ball and to make a beautiful pass here for Rashford to go. We need to control what is far from him.
And that is exactly what happened in the game. So yes, this is yet another reason why player stats still matter a lot with full manual controls. I want you to closely observe the change in Timo's run once Kai takes control of the ball. This is why you should make sure you always have fresh legs up front capable of pulling off these inspired runs behind defense in the final moments of the game. Now, the simplest way to make players move forward on the fly is by using the L2 pass, which is actually simple enough to warrant its inclusion in FIFA. I actually love it so much that almost every pass I make in the final third is probably an L2 pass. And if you want to cover greater distances, you can hold onto the ball a little longer while your player makes his forward run through defense. Of course, on manual controls, you still need to find your player, but it does a great job bringing more players into the danger zone while providing some passing animation eye candy, especially on manual controls. Manual passing allows for random realistic scenarios you can't get with assisted passing. For instance, Kante makes an L2 pass and moves forward to receive the second pass, but I mess up my aim and the ball ends up rolling behind him to Kai, who takes a shot. Now, I've covered manual passing, shooting, and off-ball movement, which attracts defenders and actually opens spaces to burst into in the final third. But with tightly packed defensive lines, it's actually movement on the ball, otherwise known as dribbling, that you'll probably be doing most of the time to find that one gap you can exploit. Dribbling is unfortunately the weakest aspect of these three pillars of offense, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It actually holds a huge advantage over FIFA's dribbling by placing a very realistic emphasis on the importance of player momentum that builds up during your run, making it realistically possible to bypass relatively stationary defenders by properly timing your ball pushes during your run, while being able to leverage your momentum against theirs. It's probably my favorite way to dribble past a defender and open up a shooting opportunity. And like everything else with PES, there's room for subtle modifiers, like delaying a second push of the ball just enough to get fouled. You can see it again here in Firmino's few small steps to draw the defender in before pushing the ball forward. Generally speaking, players with good ball control will have an easier time pushing it at just the right time without the ball rolling too far. I mean, as with manual passing and shooting, player traits will heavily influence how versatile a player will be on the ball. Whether it's their ability to quickly shift between the available dribbling speeds to wrong foot other players, or their ability to keep the ball within reach at high speeds to make it a lot harder for other players to strip the ball off of them, which also makes it easier for these players to invite tackles, then push the ball right before it happens. And with the ball kept so close at high speeds, they can rapidly chip the keeper mid-run the second they exit. So I cannot emphasize this point any stronger. Even with full manual controls, you still need good players with good stats to hold onto the ball as long as possible while your players make runs into spaces you can manually exploit to create your chances. Finally, tricks are tightly integrated into dribbling as they should be. That includes nutmegs that you can smoothly pull off mid-run, and you do those by double tapping sprint while directing your sprint through your opponent. It's actually not strictly the only way to do a nutmeg in the game, and you have more nutmeg options with better players. Activating finesse dribbling mid-run is always a treat, and these players are usually the most fun to control in tight quarters, even against the bigger teams. And through a combination of right analog stick flicks while holding down the finesse dribbling button, you'll be able to pull off a variety of skills, which can serve to open up shooting opportunities, although you won't have much momentum behind your shots, especially if you use it to turn into the opposite direction. They can also gain you some extra precious space, barely enough to get that cross into the box past the tight defense. The physics of skills themselves are sound. They follow a player's shifting center of gravity while using an opponent's momentum to burst past them into space. And of course, you're expected to slow down your dribble before pulling off a trick to lure the opponent into a foul, which you can easily convert this year. Tricks generally rely on the concept of drawing your opponent in, then bursting into another direction, and similar to dribbling, need to be pulled off at a precise moment, not too early like Ziyech here. Timing is also paramount with skills. Do it too early and your opponent will have time to intercept the ball. They range between subtle and flamboyant, but both in a realistic way, and they're far from overdone, like you lose an amount of control over the ball with every skill you pull off, forcing you to think twice about your next move after pulling off each skill. So it's actually quite rare to pull off a string of several tricks in a row. I mean, you can try of course, especially if you're afforded the space to regain control of the ball after the first skill move. And since this kind of space is usually afforded on either flanks, good luck getting the manual finesse on target. I generally recommend taking your shot right after pulling off a successful skill move, which is usually the goal of doing the trick in the first place, especially given the lack of control you'll have when dribbling in PES. I mean, there's not much wrong with dribbling so long as you don't have to change your speed as you plot your run through the gaps in defense. And if you're really advanced, you can use super cancelling to delay a touch and let the ball roll, making it easier to carry the ball past the defender en route to goal. Speaking of super cancel, I use it here with Chants to put his body between his opponent and the ball so he can carry the attack forward uninterrupted. So why again is dribbling the weakest aspect? I'm not just talking about the robotic animations. The whole mechanic is just extremely outdated when it comes to controlling your player's speed. You see, compared to manual passing and shooting where you can aim anywhere around you in 360 degrees and at any power from 1 to 100%, dribbling is restricted to only 5 speeds with unintuitive controls and with nothing in between these 5 speeds. This means your dribbling looks unnaturally sluggish as it hops from one speed to the other, and with no way to smoothly slow down, you're sometimes forced to prematurely get rid of the ball. The 5 speeds you're allowed are finesse dribbling using the right analog stick, followed by normal speed dribbling using the left analog stick. Then there's running if you hold down the sprint button. Then there's sprinting while pushing the ball further away if you double tap sprint. And finally, there is the needlessly complicated long ball push while sprinting if you move with the left analog stick while holding down the right analog stick while double tapping the sprint button. Seems like an awful lot you need to do for something way simpler to pull off in real life. As a matter of fact, it's actually a step back from legacy dribbling, back when the 5th speed could be achieved by simply triple tapping the sprint button instead of double tapping it. But if you simply want to push the ball as far as possible while dribbling, it's a needlessly complicated move in PES, especially given how important it is to make use of space to set up a shot, for example. Pushing the ball further away simply shouldn't be that complicated a move. And again, you're only allowed to sluggishly hop from one speed to the other, which makes it look so awkward and unnatural when it happens while you're on the ball, even though I've learned to make the best out of it. Changing your speed while running is a realistic way of taking on defenders in real life, but the way it's done in PES reminds me of the old days, when you can only pass into 8 directions you choose from. Before we got 16 directions, then got full 360-degree passing. This evolution didn't happen to the way we control ball speed, even though analog sticks are sensitive not only to the direction of your tilt, but also the degree of your tilt. So let me introduce to you all my concept of manual dribbling. A simple yet versatile system where the degree of analog stick tilt determines how fast my player runs, while using the number of sprint button taps to determine how far the ball is being pushed. This way you're not stuck to only one speed when sprinting. When you're not holding down sprint, the degree of analog stick tilt would gradually move from a 0 to 50% speed. With 50% speed at the far end, a normal player won't feel any difference compared to legacy dribbling, because we always move with the stick tilted all the way to the side. But when you hold down the sprint button, the degree of analog stick gradually moves from 0 to 100% speed. With 100% speed on the far end, while holding down the sprint button, a normal player also won't feel any difference compared to legacy dribbling, because we always sprint with the stick tilted all the way to the side. Now of course, just because you tilted the analog stick from 100% speed to 10% speed doesn't mean that's how the player will react. It all depends on the player you control and how versatile and responsive he'll be when it comes to changes of speed. This will encourage users to have better players on their team. Tapping sprint pushes the ball forward, the way it works now, but the more you tap it, the further away you push the ball. You can tap it as much as you want to push it further. For normal players, they won't feel a single difference compared to the current system. It's only going to make it easier for them to push the ball further away while dribbling. But for advanced players, they'll have interesting options like being able to slow down their running speed while pushing the ball the same distance. This puts more distance between you and the ball, which is useful when you're preparing for a long punch forward or to put more momentum into a shot, an effect that can be seen in the current game when a defender slows you down after you've pushed the ball, making a long range range shot more powerful with the longer run into your shot. But the main advantage of the system will be the ability to slow down your run to any value from 50 to 100% or from 0 to 50%, depending on whether the sprint button is being held or not, by simply changing how far you tilt the analog stick. But what about skill moves which are tightly bound to dribbling, you might ask? With this manual dribbling system, skill moves won't require any finesse dribbling button to be pressed. Instead, every player and every skill move will have a speed range where the skill can be pulled off successfully. This system is extremely realistic because in real life, most players will slow down before trying to wrong foot an opposing player. On the other hand, a player like Phenomenal Ronaldo will be able to pull off a step over while in full flight, as he routinely did in real life. Making dribbling controls more intuitive while fixing issues like manual finesse shots serve to make the game more accessible to the community without compromising on fun or realism, or the importance of having expensive skillful players on your team while requiring actual gamer skills to be able to utilize these expensive players to their full potential on manual controls. It is extremely short-sighted of Konami not to make manual controls their priority when promoting the game, because I feel they mistakenly think they can't make money off of controls that reward more skilled players versus a pay-to-win game that only rewards those who paid more for better players on their team. Konami can actually make way more money by pushing for manual controls. Playing on full manual is incomparably more difficult and has a much steeper learning curve, which is why you will still need expensive players on your team to help you score. But it's not the only thing you need when you're on manual controls. No matter how good your players are, you still need to develop manual shooting skills as a gamer to use these expensive players to their full potential. And I've already showed in this review how significant a difference player traits and attributes are when playing on full manual. Konami's short-sighted quick buck mentality might explain why their official esports tournaments are all littered with assisted control gameplay. I mean, what kind of professional player are you if it's the game engine that's deciding where your passes and shots end up? Playing on full manual levels the playing field a little more evenly in a realistic way between players who paid for megastars and those who have real skills without owning these expensive players. Remember when Leicester City won the league with much cheaper players than the top 6 teams by just playing better football? Now, even though this was a very rare occurrence in the history of the real competition, it's still a terrifying concept for Konami. But what they failed to realize is that by pushing for assisted controls which favor pay-to-win scenarios, they are pushing away most players who just want to have a good time with regular players, without having to watch iconic moment players blast winners with zero skill into their nets. By removing hope that a team with lesser players can win the whole thing based on their skill level alone, they are pushing many players away from the online experience, while making the game more stale and less appealing to the masses. In a way, Konami pushing for assisted controls and a pay-to-win scenario online and in its e-tournaments is similar to what the European Super League would have been, a symbol of greed where hope for smaller teams is dead because goals and hard work don't mean anything. And when there's no hope and when your skills mean nothing, passion is gone and less people end up playing, which translates to even less money for Konami. Fortunately, there are several backdoor Discord groups for PC gamers who prefer to play within communities who almost exclusively use full manual controls for their online games, while being able to use their visual mods. The group I'm a member in is called the Parsec Gentlemen's Club. He simply asks to set up a game and send an invite to the member who responds to you. It's the closest thing to the local multiplayer winning 11 experience I used to have with my friends a couple decades ago. There are also many 11 vs 11 online Discord groups for console gamers where all 22 players are using full manual controls, like PES 11 vs 11. Their games are a ton of fun to watch, and I'll leave a link to their group in the description. But having a decent online experience shouldn't be something PES gamers need to put together on their own in a sneaky backdoor way, and I shouldn't have to go through all those obstacles to have an enjoyable online experience without having my opponent rage quit after I score a second goal in the second half, while Konami rewards him by denying me points for winning while not considering his game a loss. It feels like a waste of time playing online until Konami switches from a peer-to-peer connection to a robust server-based online experience like FIFA. Speaking of the online experience, what you're seeing here is called a lag switch. It also comes in the form of pedals you can buy on eBay. What they do is introduce lag into the game at just the right time for your opponents to miss a pass or a shot. These kind of hacks only work with peer-to-peer connections, and they turn people away from playing online where Konami happens to make the most money. So it's great news that Konami has finally decided to have its own servers for next year's game, which they recently tested out on the PS4. But even the quality of the online experience circles back to improving gameplay, so we can put an end to those ridiculous online formations that aim at exploiting the long ball tactic that only works because of the AI-controlled defenders' poor awareness of other players running through their lines when the ball is still far away in the back. This brings me to the defense mechanics in PES, and this won't be as long because there's less to say about it than most other aspects of this game. The physics are just as sound as anywhere else in the game, and we look at how Thiago Silva pushes the ball against Hazard's momentum to dribble right past him. As a rule when it comes to defense, what you want to do is avoid rushing to chase the ball, ball. This leaves a player unmarked who the AI will find and punish you. Instead, you want to stay with the player on the run who they're most likely to pass to. And if that player is too far, then focus on trying to intercept the passes they are most likely to pull off. That's right, even in defense, PES will reward patience and your ability to read a pass over mindlessly rushing forward leaving your mark behind. As in real life, experience plays a significant role too. Like I've played this game long enough to know the AI will try to put a ball down the middle to Gnabry, which is why I stay on him instead of rushing to the ball. So they just move on to plan B instead. And while player physicality will reign supreme in PES, sometimes there's no motion captured animation available for a player to slow down as a result of this physicality, so they'll come to a complete stop instead. And this unnatural complete stop caused by a rigid animation engine is often enough for my player to pull ahead on target without having to deal with the tussle. This brief unnatural pause is usually enough for my player to pull through even though both players were previously running neck to neck. Most of the time, the game will do a commendable job with the positioning of defenders you're not controlling. Like check out how Thiago Silva covers the goal behind Kepa here, who's quick to go down to make that save. That is of course when the game won't auto-switch to the wrong defender. Like why wouldn't you switch to Marcelo instead of Nacho here? And while manual controls are the best way to expose the full spectrum of passing animations possible in the game, the limitations of motion capture are also exposed in the back, as you can see AI defenders taking way too long to face the actual threat. Or you can see them using poorly selected motion captured animations to block attempts on target. He practically left the goal wide open. I only missed because it's a difficult manual shot from the center. And in this play, the defender doesn't move forward before attempting to block my shot. Defenders in PES generally have very poor animations when it comes to using their bodies to prevent a player from turning and taking a shot. The defenders' running animations don't convey any special form of caution around the box, leading to some of the most infuriating goals to concede in PES. I feel like the developers forgot to capture special animations for defenders trying to prevent a player from turning to face the goal. But to be fair, it's the same problem everywhere else on the pitch. It's just too easy for the AI to turn my players inside out. There also doesn't seem to be a sliding animation the defender can use in this situation to clear the ball. Then there's the very weird AI defender behavior, where they seem to prioritize running back to some pre-programmed spot versus actually facing the incoming threat. Like, what is he doing here? Every striker already has a mark on him. Why is he running away from Modric? It's quite puzzling how AI defending can be sometimes remarkable, complete with animations that allow for heroic line clearances, while at the same time having defenders routinely run away from the ball, or just stop participating in the play altogether, which I didn't notice until I started rewatching my goals. This particular issue doesn't seem to be caused by animations, but rather bad programming that fails to adequately prioritize getting to the ball versus getting to the defender's pre-programmed position, leading to several undeserved goals. Like over here, there's no line of code that tells this defender to prioritize going for the loose ball nearby versus getting in position, and this happens even with passes by the AI to one of its teammates. There's also no algorithm for AI defenders that predicts where the ball will be after my nearby players take control of it, so they end up charging at the ball instead of moving back to react to my incoming forward momentum with the ball, allowing me to painlessly carry it forward. You can see what I'm talking about again in this play. Any real human defender will figure out that judging by Ziyech's current speed and proximity to the ball, he will most probably get to it first and carry it forward to the goal. So a real human defender would start running towards the goal to try to block this anticipated dribble. But instead in PES, the defender just directly goes for the ball. Dani Ceballos and David Luiz also prefer to hold their positions instead of rushing to intercept the ball, and that's on superstar difficulty. In here, once Firmino makes the manual pass into Mane's run, both Wolves defenders are supposed to start running towards their goal to match Mane's predicted dribble to the goal, but they're just standing there waiting for Mane to take control of the ball, and it's too late when they start running to the ball. And sometimes it's like the AI stops chasing me down altogether and lets me painlessly run around them to make a cross. And it's not like I need the goal or anything. In this example, you can see a combination of both wrong AI movement away from the ball, followed by a failure to properly chase me down on my way to the goal. So while poor programming can explain things like defenders failing to release a pass till the ball gets taken away from them, many of the defensive AI failures can be traced back to the rigid motion capture based animation engine, which leaves defenders facing the wrong direction when they should be intercepting balls running through them. It also explains their inability to stick out a leg during a running animation cycle to cut off a ball moving just past them. Like, even if I do my part and correctly predict a pass, my player won't always interrupt his running animation cycle to stick out his foot. It can also happen when you're the one passing the ball between your own players. And while I'm sure the lack of reaction to a ball's proximity is partly because of the dreaded scripting, which I admit does lead to many goal scoring opportunities much needed on full manual controls, while also conveniently dumbing down my players when the AI decides to score. Like, seriously Konami, don't make my defenders stupid near the end, but just make the AI take bigger risks which would be more realistic. I'm sure the lack of reaction reaction to a ball's proximity is more about an animation limitation of the dumb motion capture based system, because sometimes when a player is close to a ball during a particular part of the animation cycle, it can actually trigger an attempt to intercept it, or if you're lucky, you can take control of the ball altogether. So obviously, there is code somewhere that tells players the ball is nearby, and you can see evidence of that in the animations that get players out of the way of a shot by bending over, for example. So when a player fails to get out of the way, or just fails to respond to the ball appropriately, it feels like a problem with animations rather than coding, the exception being AI-controlled players running into a known ball trajectory, running into a cross, or just running into each other. Yeah, that's just poor programming. As is this example, Ramos intercepts the ball, but instead of going for the loose ball rolling away from Ramos, the AI striker seems to have received some pre-programmed signal that his team lost the ball, so he needs to run back into his out-of-possession position, and that's a problem. Players should react to the ball a little more independently from the general status of ball possession. It's the natural way players should react to a loose ball anywhere on the pitch. And of course, I'm not talking about the inappropriate player switching issues, which I've already adequately covered in this review. I'm talking here about players I am in full control of, like the cursor is already on them. And also, this lack of reaction to the ball has nothing to do with the player's ball control stats. And it's not a problem exclusive to manual passing. Like here, the keeper passes the ball to Kai, who can't summon proper animations to deal with it. Sometimes, it's because they need to awkwardly turn to face the ball, which happens all the time even with AI players. Or sometimes, they're running in an opposite direction and can't stick a foot out. Or sometimes, the available animation isn't aggressive enough to intercept, or is just inappropriate, like why is Cruz acting like he's in the penalty box here? And sometimes, there's just no available animation to deal with an incoming ball arriving at a certain height. Or the engine will use the closest animation that shouldn't produce this particular ball movement. Seriously, this game is severely held back by relying purely on dumb motion captured animations. Like here, despite filling up the power bar long before the ball was over him, Ramos doesn't even attempt to jump at it. With set animations, players are sometimes forced to complete a full motion sequence even if it doesn't make sense. Like this player here, who Andy is about to run into. Instead of sticking out a leg towards the ball, he actually completes a running motion sequence past Andy, then awkwardly pauses. And finally in this play, check out how long it takes Sergio to turn around here. He needlessly completes an animation moving him across the ball, then turns into the wrong direction. The keen-eyed among you will notice the keeper's delayed reaction to the ball when there's a defender blocking his line of sight. This is probably the feature I am most impressed by in PES. It's something I've noticed since 2018, but even more when I switched to full manual controls, where the more random ball trajectory can pass through several players in front of the goalie. Take this incredible Henderson long ranger into the near post, and notice the keeper's realistically delayed jump. It's only after I watched the replay that I noticed Firmino blocking the keeper's line of sight, so he only sees it too late into its flight. In this play, as with most manual shots, Casemiro blasts the ball straight at the goal, and I noticed another delayed reaction by the keeper. But when you examine the replay, you find not one, but two players blocking the keeper's line of sight, leading to the realistically delayed reaction. In an ideal world, the referee would of course call an offside against Benzema for interfering in the play, but I'll get to the broken referee at the end of this review. But unlike referees and defenders, keepers are actually a very strong point in PES. Combined with manual shooting, they provide an exciting challenge to the most skilled full manual players out there, and they keep getting better every year. Like, take a look at this save by Courtois. It's nothing special, but he's quickly back on his feet ready for a second save, followed by a third one. And they're not overpowered or anything. Like, they'll pull off several saves in a row as long as they're within reach. As fast as their reactions are this year, they aren't overdone in any way or form. And it's extremely important in a football game to have reliable keepers, because it's one of those aspects you don't have control of. It's almost entirely controlled by the game engine. Probably because saves happen too fast to allow for any input on your side. So I just expect him to do a good job spreading his limbs out to block the goal, or to have the necessary agility to go down when he needs to. I expect keepers to have good reflexes, especially when the ball is within their reach. And anything the player doesn't have full control over, like keepers, needs to be perfect in order to bring frustrations to a realistic minimum. And keepers are expected to realistically screw up every now and then. Like, I didn't like how the game engine decided to have Alisson autonomously exit the goal and take out my defender. But the very next day, in real life, that's exactly what happened in Liverpool's match with Leicester. I couldn't believe it. But yeah, keepers are generally very reliable, they have phenomenal reflexes, which contributes to retaining the fun factor in the game. But it's also why the occasional keeper brain fart is extremely frustrating. The game's limited animation engine is still an issue, of course, especially when it comes to summoning an appropriate leg animation. Don't get me wrong, keepers pull off amazing leg saves all the time. They even pull off head saves, apparently, as I found out when I watched this replay. But because there's no motion captured animation to help them meet a ball on their thigh, Neuer is forced to save the ball with his bum, apparently. I mean, I've already seen the AI try to shoot with their ass, so why not? Speaking of Neuer, or any other offensive goalkeeper for that matter, there is a game-breaking exploit I discovered that only works with full manual controls. Apparently, these offensive keepers will push out so far that you can easily lob them by going for a full power, full manual lob. And if you're past the center line, just stop short of a full power bar when you lob the keeper. It's even easier because the developers didn't account for a fast sprint back animation for keepers, so Neuer will often casually jog back to the goal before realizing too late he needed to be sprinting. Your only challenge here will be getting the aim right, which isn't the easiest thing to do on full manual from halfway across the pitch. Defensive goalkeepers, on the other hand, are a pain to deal with because they won't even rush out to meet you, which is exactly what I rely on happening before chipping a keeper. But other than that Neuer exploit, keepers are generally a strong point in this year's game. But the more impressive the keepers are, the more these animation problems become more apparent. Like over here, you'd expect Courtois to use his right arm to block the third shot, but instead, he turns to face the far post while diving. This has actually been an issue for several years, where keepers dive with both arms in situations where they should reach with one arm instead. Again, keepers will routinely pull off impressive one-arm saves. It just needs to be used in more situations. The recovery animations can use smarter predictive coding, like here Courtois pulls off probably the two most impressive saves I've ever seen. But then he recovers into a crouched position, even though it's a high ball and he'll need his full height to counter it. And even if the right animation is triggered, the arm position of the motion capture sequences can't be modified on the fly with the keeper in mid-air. That said, if a jump sequence hasn't already been initiated, they will still impressively react to a deflection. But as I've previously shown, the engine will wait for a motion captured animation sequence to complete, even if it's no longer needed before breaking it off. In this example, the keeper already reacts to the deflection, and without a captured animation for this particular situation, the rigid engine won't allow him to just grab the ball while he's down. And there's also the gravity-defying Superman save animation that really needs to go away. The general lack of ball awareness in PES can also affect keepers, and you can see both this issue and the animation limitation happening here. Thiago Silva fails to summon an animation that helps him avoid running into Mendy, who casually walks away because the game is telling him that Thiago has possession of the ball. The keeper's predictive movement can use some work too, like here he ignores the fact Asensio will probably intercept this cross into the box, and you can see him shuffling to the left to meet the original trajectory. There's also always room for more animation to avoid pushing the ball into their own net. And very rarely, but more commonly with manual controls, probably because the ball's on a more random trajectory, occasionally the motion captured save sequence won't be precise enough to hold onto a seemingly easy ball. Again, it would help if the engine allowed for a degree of independent modification of the arm position during a motion captured jump animation with a realistic range of movement that isn't too extreme. And finally, some legacy keeper issues are still there, like the way they push a looping ball back into the pitch instead of over the crossbar. They will push lower balls over the crossbar though, but as I covered in my first review of PES, one big legacy issue that was almost completely resolved this year was keeper exits, which have seen a night and day difference. It's easily the one aspect of the entire game that has seen the biggest improvement this year. Like, look how Kepa starts his jump animation even before the shot is taken. It's not just their speed when bursting forward to get into position, or how much more focused they are on the ball when they exit compared to previous years. I also love how they pull off mid-run saves without me having to stop them halfway, which you'll still have to do to avoid getting lobbed, and it does happen to throw off your opponent. But unfortunately, as much as the keeper exits have improved this year, the AI still doesn't always take advantage of them as often as it should. Like in this play, Alisson is a lot closer than Modric to the point where the shot is taken, but he doesn't come out to meet it. But as I've shown in another example, this conservative approach to AI goalkeeping does actually make chipping them more challenging. But it makes me wish we had manual dribbling speeds governed by the degree of analog stick tilt, so I can choose the appropriate speed needed to time my chip over the keeper. Now if you fail to stop your exit when you should, don't expect the keeper to autonomously slow down, and you do run the risk of having your keeper tackle the striker outside the box, which can get him sent off if he's the last player. I said can, not will, because the broken referee has a too strict definition of what constitutes a last player. Like, even if a defender is technically behind the keeper but won't be able to interfere at all, referee won't consider the keeper the last player and will only book him. This is probably the least of anyone's problems with the referees in this game, and so is the lack of handballs in the game, even those blocking a clear shot on target. Like, even keepers can unintentionally make saves with their hands outside the penalty box, and it won't be called. But as I said, this isn't even the least of my concerns with the referee. Sure, it would be cool to have handballs in the game, but you know what's even cooler? Getting my extremely clear-cut penalties awarded in this game. It's been almost 4 years of this bullshit. Like, check out this play. The defender tries to pass the ball, but Asensio pushes the ball first, so the defender kicks Asensio instead and a foul is given. That's normal, right? I get a free kick, it's maybe a little too easy to score, I'll get to that later in this review. But when the same play happens inside the penalty box, only a whole lot more clear-cut, Konami actually has code that prevents a penalty from being given, even with punches and elbows to the face, which are always called as fouls outside the penalty box. If you get punched in the penalty box, Konami's anti-penalty code prevents it from being called every single time. Defenders will be penalized for missing the ball and taking you out when it happens outside the box, where you can at least capitalize on the awarded free kick. But when it happens inside the box, Konami's anti-penalty code kicks in. It no longer matters if the defender takes out the player before touching the ball when it happens in the penalty box. Penalties will just not be given for these fouls, not even for the AI when it's not a sliding tackle. Very recently, in Data Pack 5 or 6, the anti-penalty code started allowing some tackles to be called as penalties. I won't lie, it's definitely a huge improvement in the code, as long as they won't reverse this change in Data Pack 7, which is what happened last year by the way. The referee won't even give an advantage when the tackle happens in the box, which is good, and they even included non-tackles like sliding attempts to clear the ball. But collisions in the penalty box will still go unpunished, and it is extremely frustrating. Collisions in general are the single most irritating thing about PES these past few years. You better get used to routinely seeing your players being taken out without penalties being given. The horrible collision engine isn't intentional, it's just bad programming that affects the AI as well. And I'll take bad programming any day over intentional anti-penalty programming which prevents fouls like these from being called in the box. That said, it's still really bad code that doesn't work as intended, and the referee will only reliably recognize a foul if it includes an actual tackle animation by the defender. Like in this example, I thought the referee recognized the collision as a foul, but if you look very closely, the defender goes for a tackle right before the collision. These collision issues were introduced around 2 years ago. The initial goal was to replicate the physical nature of football to make it more immersive, but it's not immersive when my player gets taken out after getting to the ball first before a tackle, with no foul being called. The main problem is that they were unable to code a referee AI capable of figuring out which collisions count as fouls and which ones don't. They first tried to make every collision count as a foul in the demo, but the fluidity of the game suffered tremendously with every touch being called by the referee. I mean, Trent wouldn't be able to pull off this legit tackle back then. So they just went the opposite direction with the full release, and the result is this mess of a referee AI we have on our hands here. And it's not like it's a problem with no solution. Here's a suggestion. If player A takes control of the ball, but an opposition player makes contact directed at the player in possession other than shoulder to shoulder into the same direction of run without touching the ball first in a significant way, resulting in player A's forward speed dropping to less than 30% of its original value, then a foul needs to be called. Simple. For example, this is a shoulder to shoulder collision with both players side by side running in the same direction. It's legal and shouldn't be awarded. On the other hand, this shoulder barge is not side by side and it comes from a different direction. This is a foul. The same applies to this shoulder barge where Pogba completely takes out Pulisic. That should have been a foul too. On the other hand, this is not a shoulder to shoulder collision and it takes out Alonso, who was in possession, without Jones touching the ball first. This should be a foul. In this play, Sheffield's player sticks out his foot. He doesn't touch the ball and he takes out Salah and the team loses possession. This should have been a foul. The importance of defining what constitutes a significant touch of the ball can be seen in this play. Salah nutmegs Rudiger, who takes him down. A foul isn't called. When you examine the replay, you can see the ball spin slightly change when Rudiger touches it first before he takes down Salah, but the change in the ball speed and direction makes it an insignificant touch, and a foul should have been called. The same thing happens here. Regardless of the anti-penalty programming in Konami's code, this should have been a penalty for the AI, even though close examination of the ball spin shows that Rudiger touched it before taking out Basil's player, but he didn't influence the ball enough before the tackle. Any head-to-head trauma should be a foul awarded to the player who got to it first. So in this case, Casemiro got to it first, so this is actually a good call. It's trickier dealing with loose balls. If a player with a higher than 50% chance of getting to the loose ball receives contact that reduces his chances to lower than 50%, then a foul should be given, which is what happens here. Defining possession is tricky too. In this example, technically, Sevilla's player never actually touches the ball. One might say that Carvajal, who was already running, had the higher chance of getting to the ball even without the collision. In this case, I'd say that intentionally letting the ball pass through your legs counts as possession, and a foul should have been given. On the other hand, this shouldn't have been a foul. Yes, Firmino makes contact with Axel before touching the loose ball, but Axel's chances of getting to the ball before Firmino were significantly less than 50%. And since Axel doesn't intentionally let the ball pass through him first, this shouldn't have been a foul. The significance of contact needing to be directed towards the player in possession can be seen here. The defender in this play actually takes control of the ball before pushing Marcelo to the side, but Marcelo then moves towards the ball. In doing so, he does make contact with the defender before touching the ball. This contact blocks the defender, slowing him down and resulting in a loss of possession. But Marcelo's movement was directed to the ball, not the defender. Moreover, the defender's chance of getting the ball before Marcelo was less than 50% without the contact, so a foul shouldn't have been given against Marcelo. In this play, Lindelof was never in possession of the ball. Timo Werner just got to it first. This is a bad call, and a foul shouldn't have been awarded to United. Getting to the ball first shouldn't guarantee no foul being called if you did it dangerously with your boots at close proximity to a player's head. Like, this should have been a foul. This is a clearer example of how bad the referee AI is with collisions. Salah gets to the loose ball first, then gets kicked by Lucas. The referee awards a foul against Salah, even though Salah gets to the ball first. But on a rare occasion, the referee will award the correct foul. Like here, Mane clearly gets to the ball first, then Egan's foot takes him out without a tackle. I get a free kick and score what is probably the most perfect free kick I've ever taken in 30 years of playing football games. If the contact results in a reduction of the player's speed to between 30 and 70% of its value, then an advantage should be given while the engine waits to know if the ball shifted possession. Casemiro loses possession here, so this should be a foul. On the other hand, Modric gets slowed down here, but he doesn't lose possession, so an appropriate advantage is given. Speaking of the advantage rule, it's seen some changes in PES 2021. For instance, fouls after taking your shot will no longer be called. An advantage isn't automatically cancelled if you take 1 or even 2 touches of the ball after the foul. However, you lose the advantage if you've taken your shot, which I feel is fair. Advantage play actually works the way it's been working the past several years, which isn't bad at all. I also love how the AI won't rush to regain possession of the ball when an advantage has been given, because they don't want you to get a free kick, but it still can use several improvements in next-gen PES. Like, the whole idea is to allow play to go on as long as no player gets injured, so why the hell would the referee abort this advantage he already gave just to give out a warning? Speaking of which, the referee AI has no clear and consistent definition of when to caution players, and I already mentioned this, but while he will give a straight red for last player tackles, he won't do it if a single defender is anywhere close to the end of the pitch, even if this player has no chance of interfering with the play, although he will give a straight red for a tackle from behind. And you'd also think he'd issue a yellow if a player commits 2 sliding tackles in a row after an advantage, but he only goes for a warning. My biggest issue with advantage play over the past 3 years actually has more to do with the way offside calls are given. I mean, look at the referee here. He gives the advantage first because he knows the foul happened, but ends up giving an offside. The problem is that the referee AI mistakenly registers the offside call the second the ball leaves the player's foot, so it awards an offside instead of a foul. But in real-life FIFA rules, an offside will only be called once the ball actually reaches the player on the other end. The foul should be awarded because it happens first. Let's examine page 98 of FIFA's official laws of the game. In situations where a player in an offside position is moving towards the ball with the intention of playing the ball and is fouled before playing or attempting to play the ball or challenging an opponent for the ball, the foul is penalized as it occurred before the offside offense. That's right. Even if it's the receiver in the offside position, not the passer, who gets fouled before getting to the ball, a foul should be given, and not an offside. And it even happens without an actual pass being made. Like over here, Cruz gets fouled and the ball rolls to Benzema in an offside position, so an offside call is mistakenly made. Offside isn't completely broken though. For instance, if a ball is headed by an opponent to a player in an offside position, the play will allow to continue, which is good. But the issue of fouls being cancelled because of offside calls that happened after the fouls were committed is extremely infuriating because of how important free kicks around the penalty box are in PES. I actually love scoring free kicks in PES, which is why I left this part to the end of my review. You see, I don't want to call them too easy, even if, yes, they might be too easy. But that's only because there's room for many real-life variables that would influence the ball's trajectory other than your input and the player's stats. But the actual physics surrounding free kick taking are actually extremely well done in PES, and good physics will always translate into satisfying goals. And it works that way. The more the left analog stick moves to the left side after filling the power bar, the more the ball swerves to the left. The lower you point on the side, the lower the area of the ball the player will strike, which diverts some of the power of your shot towards producing a topspin at the expense of forward speed. Hitting the ball from a lower point lifts it higher at the beginning without having to rely on power. This makes it ideal for close-range free kicks where you need this early rise followed by the topspin's dip. Forward speed gets diverted into a side spin too, but you don't really care about producing forward speed to beat the keeper because the ball doesn't have a long distance to cover at such close range. It is by far my most reliable way for scoring free kicks, and because you get a heavier spin using this method, you need to compensate more aggressively for that curl, and you do that by actually aiming further away from the goal before taking the shot, so the ball stays away from the keeper after the curl. It also works further away at medium range by filling up the power bar a little more so the ball travels a little faster while reaching the goal a little higher higher, away from the keeper's reach. This way, the ball's height makes up for the lack of forward speed. The more power you put into a topspin, the higher the ball's trajectory. Although you need to be mindful of how close you are to the goal. Like this here is way too much power for that range, even with a topspin. And with less power delivered, you get a lower ball placement with the same shot. The better the player's curl stats, the more power you're able to pour into the shot using this method, since the longer swerve trajectory gives the ball room to dip down despite the increased power. Your placement away from the keeper will have to be perfect from that far out if you're applying a topspin. Tilting the left stick to the middle side maximizes side swerve while allowing for more forward power with a little dip. On the other hand, the higher you point the right stick, the less power gets diverted into a top and side spin. This means almost all the power input goes into forward speed. This makes it ideal for far free kicks, because the only way to clear the ball without a topspin is to put in a lot of power, and you'll need to prioritize forward speed over swerve to beat keepers from that far out. You can try the slower topspin method, but you'll need too much power to generate enough speed to beat the keeper from that far out, even if you mess up the aim without a topspin. And you can see here that I didn't compensate enough for the swerve. The forward speed alone might be enough to push it past the keeper. Getting the power right is actually more important for this type of free kick. Just keep in mind that you won't get much of a side swerve to correct an exaggerated aim towards the center, but the payoff is incredible when you get it just right. Finally, for the farthest free kicks, your best hope is to get a player with a dipping shot trait, because even if you get the power and aim perfectly done with a traditional shot, a good keeper will have time to get to it. For a dipping shot, you put in maximum power, let go of the stick, and hold shoot right before your player shoots the ball. It's the only way to dip the ball without compromising speed. There are of course other ways to score free kicks that don't use swerves, but I found the swerving types I listed to be the most reliable. Maybe too reliable as a matter of fact. But I think it's because of the keeper's lack of predictive movement, making their reaction to free kicks probably a little slower than it should be, even with a less than ideal ball placement. Like, check out how Ospina takes a small step to the left once it became clear that Messi won't go for the far post. And compare that to PES, where keepers only move after the ball becomes visible. Like Ziyech is left-footed. He takes 2 steps to the right, making it more likely that he's going to curl it into the near post, compared to the much harder swerve into the far post. But the keeper still doesn't move till the ball is already past the wall. It doesn't help that their positioning is too aggressively one-sided to begin with, and the issue of world-class keepers sometimes using both arms inappropriately doesn't make them as challenging as they should be. And even with a ball right over their heads, they sometimes won't reach the crossbar, which is odd because I've seen them jump way higher in open play, and it doesn't feel as rewarding when the only player in the wall who didn't jump is the one right under the ball. But sometimes players won't jump to counter a sneaky low shot. But maybe next year we can have the option to have a player lying on the ground. This way they can all jump. The straight ones will often go around the area you're aiming at, even though you haven't applied any modifiers. It's actually a realistic way of adding variety to the outcome, but I'd prefer if real-life variables were also introduced to make things a little more challenging when aiming away from the keeper. Like this here is Lionel Messi. He routinely scores long-distance free kicks in real life with impossibly good placement. For instance, ball pressure starts low in a match, rising gradually as the game proceeds. The more real-life variables are thrown into a simulation, the more realistic and variable the game is, without having to deal with random possibilities that are often frustrating because it's not something you can account for when you're on the ball. I mean, predictive goalkeeper movement of free kicks isn't something that would piss me off. And finally, even free kicks aren't immune to referee glitches. If you're playing on manual, you can actually pass a free kick to yourself. So that was my review. As you've seen, yes, this is the best football simulator out there. It gets the basics right. I mean, passing into space feels great, shooting feels even better, and you get these random moments every now and then, like how an injured player receiving treatment can burst onto the pitch at just the right time to take back the ball. And even though this game is carried by its phenomenal on-pitch player movement, especially on the offensive side, made even better when using manual passing and shooting, where the shots you miss will carry a much more significant emotional weight, and you won't feel as frustrated when you waste a beautiful build-up play because it was you who got the aim wrong, there still are several important gameplay issues that need to be prioritized over any visual improvements, especially given how beautiful the fully modded game already looks like. I mean, sure, it would be nice to have FIFA's fancy goal line technology cutscenes, for all those goal line clearances that warrant a second look, instead of having to do it myself in replay mode. I mean, it would be a more immersive touch compared to having an immediate decision when the ball crosses the line. And I've spoken enough about the horrible goal celebration cutscenes in my main review, where players get transported, they all have the same height, and it's often glitchy. It's so bad, like Henderson takes his penalty, then watch him suddenly run with his teammates to Alisson. The net physics are leaps and bounds ahead of FIFA, of course, but they're still not as fluid as a 15-year-old Japanese game called Football Kingdom. Player rankings use primitive methods, like Mane scored all 3 goals here and gets an 8.5. And that includes big basic issues like the robotic dribbling, which is one of the 3 pillars of attacking play. But even in the game's strongest aspects, there will always be room for improvement. For instance, as good as ball physics are in this game, I'm not sure I'm a fan of how the ball rebounds the same distance when a keeper grabs it on 2 attempts. But yeah, I hope I was able to convey the beautiful way PES attempts to mimic the beautiful game, and all the random yet realistic ways you can score goals in a game where good passers will inspire your teammates to make runs that cut through the defense, made even better with manual controls where your misses won't frustrate you as much and your triumphs will feel way more rewarding. So before I talk about the future of this channel, just wanted to thank again this video sponsor, OneFootball App. I mean, I use this app myself every single day. It's incredible. Delivers to you all the recent news and transfers about the favorite teams that you care about. And I've left a link in the description to get the free app, so check it out. This video was actually only possible because of your support. Konami didn't make modding easily accessible to newcomer PC gamers with no experience, so I included a free all-in-one link to all the free mods I've used in this video under one download. No donation is required, but it's appreciated since keeping an upload that big online does cost money, and videos like this do take a ton of time to make. For the more advanced users, I've included links to the original threads on EVO-WEB's editing forum, where the updated versions of these mods will be available and you can directly communicate with their brilliant creators. I've also linked the paid mods I've been using, like Jeremiah's handmade turf and fog mod he individually made for every European stadium in the major leagues to match the version you see on TV. The reason this video is so long is because it's actually many videos in one. I was supposed to do a quick end-year review, then do the usual referee AI complaining video, then do a big FUMA review / tutorial where I show everyone why you really need to learn full manual controls before PES 2022 is out. And finally, I wanted to make a video about manual dribbling, which is one of many highly detailed gameplay ideas I've been putting together for a football game that I felt I should share here in this video. Unfortunately, I won't have time to do any of that over the next few months, which is why I decided to put it all in one video. You see, I'm making this video in the middle of a big move to another country with me and the missus this month, and after that we'll spend another month settling into our new home while I start a job that will occupy my time from 6 AM to 8 PM 6 days of the week, while somehow trying to make time to study for one last very important exam I'll be sitting for around December, which is too important for any distractions. This means I probably won't be able to make a PES 2022 review this year before Christmas. Not being able to play PES 2022 early is painful to me more than anyone else, since this is probably the single most anticipated PES game in the history of the series. The only way I can provide an early Realism review is if Konami gives me an advanced copy of the Unreal version, so that I have time to play the game, collect footage, and put together a video by September if the Unreal version comes out by then, while having 3 months to get back into my studying groove. This is a long shot, since Konami has never sent me any review copies of PES throughout the years, but yeah, if any senior Konami marketers are out there watching this video, try to send me an advanced PC copy of the Unreal version. I might be able to get that review done in time, but otherwise, it'll have to come out early next year. This is probably for the better, since PES 2022 pretty much has no mods for it. It's a completely new game, new engine, and nobody has any idea how the files will be structured. By January, we'll probably have a few scoreboards and stadiums ready to be imported. So till then, I might have limited time over weekends to push out a best plays of the week video, or maybe a Master League series if I do get some playtime over the week. So yeah, that was my end credits rant. The channel is not dead and it won't be. I just have too many things coming up the second half of this year, but I can't wait to come back stronger next year. And with all the hype, I sure hope PES 2022 doesn't end up disappointing us. The only way it will disappoint me is if they don't address the gameplay issues I've raised in this review, because they've been with us long enough, and 3 years of development is too long for only visual changes. I'll still be very active on my Twitter, so you can follow me there for recent casual gameplay clips and other PES related news. That's it for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.